anyway, we will start with just an introduction from all of our panelists where they'll share a little bit about their journey and where they work and how they got there. And then we'll go into some question and answer. And depending on kind of what our numbers look like at the end, we may go into some breakout rooms where we can have more intimate conversations. But we'll just kind of see what our numbers look like as we continue on in the program. But anyways, if we wanted to turn it over to our panelists, to just take a moment to introduce yourself. I'm looking at Monica, you're the first person who's popping up in my box order. So if you wanted to start.
Sure, thank you, Beth. Hello, everybody. My name is Monica Leonardo. I'm an attorney from Guatemala. I went to Georgetown Law School for an LLM degree, a Master of Laws degree, and I specialize in human rights. I've been working for the past decade and a half on a wide number of human rights issues, including transitional justice, access to justice, vulnerable populations, indigenous rights, LGBTIQ rights, women's rights, mostly in Guatemala, but also across the Americas and in the Middle East. And I'm very happy to be with all of you today here.
Wonderful, thank you. Would anybody like to volunteer to go next?
Sure, I'll go. Hi, everyone. My name is Raimy Reyes. I'm a lawyer from the Dominican Republic. I did law school there, and then I did my master's at Georgetown with a Fulbright scholarship. Like Monica, I also focused in human rights law. So I did my master's in international legal studies and then did a certificate in international human rights law. In my career path, I've worked in human rights issues for the past 10 years, working NGOs, academia. I actually worked at the Georgetown Law Human Rights Institute, government of the Dominican Republic, and then various international organizations such as the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights of the Organization of American States, the International Organization of Migration, and most recently the UN Refugee Agency. So I focus mostly on groups within the context of human mobility. That's asylum seekers, refugees, migrants, internally displaced people, victims of human trafficking, and so forth. So I'm really happy to be here, and anything I can share from that side of the field of working with refugees, I'm more than happy to do so.
Wonderful, thank you, Raimy. Michael, would you like to go next?
Sure. Good morning to everyone, and it's great to have everyone together and have this conversation. I look forward to hearing from some of the other alum as well as questions from the group. I graduated from School of Foreign Service back in '87, met my wife who was class of '88 there, and have been working in the international development field the past 30 years. And so a lot of my work has been focused on Latin America and the Caribbean. Have worked with an array of different organizations, starting out with UNICEF, actually in the Dominican Republic. And then I worked as the country representative for a number of countries with the Inter-American Foundation. Have worked with the national nonprofit here focused on youth development, and then was the regional director for programming and training for Peace Corps, and then was what's called a chief of party for USAID program on gang prevention in Central America, and now am the agency senior advisor on youth issues at USAID. So I work with our missions all around the world, helping them think about how they're designing better programming around youth, whether it's in the health, education, employment, peace and security sectors. So yeah, look forward to sharing with you some of the different things that I've learned about kind of the different career paths, at least related to USAID and some of the other agencies.
Great. Alexandra?
Hi everyone, I'm Alexandra Lamarche and I work for Refugees International. I cover West and Central Africa. Despite its name, given the countries that I cover, that's predominantly internal displacement. So I rarely work on refugee issues. I guess I'm perhaps a misunderstood. I didn't go to Georgetown. I'm a huge fan, but I'm from Canada. I went to University of Ottawa and then went to University of Sussex in the UK. Sorry. But I do a lot of these types of events with Georgetown students, so I'm happy to engage. And obviously I live in Washington. So I actually studied conflict resolution in the context of asymmetric warfare. It's what I did both my undergrad and my master's on. And that brought me to working in Lebanon, where I was there at a time where Syrians were flooding into the country. And I realized that I should stop looking at war as a game and realized that there was, people's lives were forever changed by it. So I sort of threw my hat into the humanitarian space. And now I cover West and Central Africa. So that's what I do. I work on advocacy, which is obviously very, very challenging when it comes to French-speaking African countries, especially in the US. It often feels like screaming into a void, hoping that people will sort of engage more effectively and engage at all. So I'm happy to get into the sort of the challenges of advocacy, but I love what I do, and I'm happy to talk about whatever can be helpful to all students.
Great, thank you. And we're always happy to have friends of Georgetown here. Like, being a Georgetown alum is wonderful. Friends of Georgetown are also amazing. So we're glad you're here. Okay. All right. So I guess we'll go ahead and start out with some questions. One is, I know, and I'm going to spring a surprise one on you, but I think it's kind of easy. If you can all think back to, when you were graduating, either from undergraduate degrees, or I know some of you have like master's degrees, how did you kind of first throw your hat in the ring in humanitarian careers? Because what we see on our end is it's often really difficult for especially our undergraduate students to like get that first step into the field. They often require, master's degrees or law degrees or, so many years abroad. But like, think back to what you first did and like, what was that first step, or what would you suggest to our students who are interested in this field as to how to get that first step into the humanitarian field?
So I could jump in, and again, most of my work is in the broader development field, and I wouldn't say as much in the humanitarian space as some of the other speakers. But for me, one of the first things I did as I was coming into my senior year, I knew I wanted to do service after Georgetown. And at that time, Peace Corps wasn't in. I had done a gap year before college, traveling throughout Mexico and other countries, and I wanted to go back there. So I actually worked with the Center for Immigration Policy and Refugee Assistance to set up a program that we brought Georgetown graduates to do a year of service in Mexico, and then we expanded the program to Honduras and Haiti. So literally built out an opportunity that fit my interest, and found support at Georgetown to do that. And that kind of grew out, we called it Hands Across the Borders, taking graduates to do a year of service or 2 years of service. And that then spun into an opportunity where, while I was down there, I got to work with some UNICEF folks from UNICEF Mexico, and that opened up an opportunity to go and interview for a position with UNICEF in New York. And I was totally unqualified for it. Let me just tell you, I was totally unqualified. But someone gave me the best piece of advice ever. They said, go to the US Committee for UNICEF, interview with the executive director, see if they'll support you. They wrote up a letter. I went there. They said, all right, we'll at least send your resume down to the 2 missions. One was the Dominican Republic, one was Guatemala. And just out of pure luck, the director of UNICEF at that time was looking for someone who had a few of the skills that I had, and brought me on, and that brought me into the UNICEF system at that point. And road leads to road. So 3 quick things I'll leave with you as advice. One, I remember when I was at Georgetown, we organized a national conference, getting young people from different perspectives on global issues to come together and debate those issues, but in a collective and collaborative way. And we brought Jack Healy in, who was the head of Amnesty International at the time. And he said, I just went to my Harvard 25th reunion. He said, there were all these captains of industry. And he said, everyone came up to me and said, I wish I'd followed your path, Jack. And he said, service to others is what it's all about. The definition of success of, being that captain of industry or making lots of money rings hollow after a few years. And so he said, think about that path less taken and that road less taken, and service to others. And the second part was, never be afraid to, never fear to do what seems beyond your reach, even sending in that application, because I was not qualified for the UNICEF position, but I put it in anyway, and I worked my tail off to be the best I could be at that position, and that allowed me to be successful there. And then the last thing is road leads to road. And so you may have an idea of where your path is going to take you, but all along your career journey, you're going to be making decisions that will change. And I remember my mom used to say, if you want to hear God laugh, tell him your plans, because road will lead to road. And I thought I was going to be one thing when I went into Georgetown. I thought it was going to be another thing when I got out of Georgetown. My road has led me in all sorts of fascinating ways. So be open to those opportunities to put yourself out there. So I'll stop there.
I can follow up. So I did my law degree in the Dominican Republic. So I'm assuming also Monica's probably the same for you, where you go from high school directly to law school. You don't go to, you don't have to do 4 years of college before you go into law school. So while I was in law school, I always had like this want and need to help others. So that's how everyone kind of gets into the humanitarian field, because you want to help. And that's the most noble cause. And then we'll learn with the other questions how that can have its other perspectives. So I started doing it from the law or human rights perspective. So started doing model UN and moot courts. And throughout all this moot courts, you learn how to use the UN human rights mechanisms, the regional human rights mechanisms. So you accrue all this knowledge just as a law student, and then you're like, how can I put this to work? Because I can do this. I know how to fact find human rights violations. I know the international standards. I know how to approach this human rights bodies now. So I started volunteering with this local NGO of lawyers who, it was literally volunteering to share knowledge on international public law and international human rights law, because no one was talking about it. So it was just like a group of nerdy lawyers really loving human rights law. So one of our mentors in that group said, why don't we put a brief together for the biggest human rights issue in the DR, which is statelessness of descendants of Haitian immigrants. And we started doing that. We put a brief together. We filed an amicus with the Inter-American Court on Human Rights. And then we just started doing that work a lot at the local level, but working with regional human rights bodies and giving them information and kind of saying, this is happening, but from the legal perspective. And as Michael just said, it led then to, there was a fellowship that opened up at the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, especially on the reportership on rights of migrants, which focused very much on the issue of statelessness. And I applied to it, and I was like, I only applied for that. I had no plans to leave the country at that moment. I was like, okay, I think I can do this. I'll apply. And then I got it. And then that eventually led to starting to work at UNHCR. So it all kind of leads one place. I thought I liked another part of human rights. And then I got into the path of people within the context of human mobility. So I just want to say, to wrap it up and put it in the context, in the format of like advice, I would say volunteer always first. Volunteer, apply for that internship, that fellowship. All of these international organizations and local organizations, you don't have to go abroad to do humanitarian work. That's very important to know this. Like, there is a lot of work to do in your home country, no matter what your home country is. So start there, start volunteering. And if it's not there what you want to do, you can create it. There are a lot of people willing to support, like economically, if you come up with a good plan, and or logistically and so forth. So there are probably already small groups that you can join and start volunteering and start doing an internship. So I would say the need for interns is higher than what you think, and that's a way to get in, to know the organization, and then to understand how it works in order to get to a position where you can actually apply for a consultancy or a staff position. So just, you know, get your feet in, and you'll start getting the ways of the land pretty soon.
I can add to that on the internship piece. I know it's a daunting thing to do, and I know that for a lot of people financially, that's a little bit tricky. I mean, I the concept of having to pay your dues is something that I take issue with, but it's also something that is sort of common, and it's a weird, I don't really know how to break. I know that there's increasingly paid internships, and that's good. What I did was find organizations that are either, and I've told Luca this, but either Swiss or French, because legally they have to pay their interns. So if you're willing to go somewhere in the humanitarian world, you tend to be like housed and fed. So the fact that you're only making, you know, 250 to 750 euros a month is actually more than you would be making otherwise, because you're being fed and lodged. So there's sort of these loopholes that you have to figure out. I mean, for me, I worked 3 jobs all throughout university. I mean, there's ways you can make it happen. It's not always glamorous. It's not always fun. It's hard work and it's tiring, but if it's really what you want to do, and I think it can actually lead somewhere. And similarly, I had no plan, I don't think, ever. And that flexibility afforded me so many opportunities because I never had a set plan. And I think I meet a lot of students, especially here in the US, who are like 20 and are like, this is my career ambition. And I'm like, you're going to change paths so often from now until the time you're in your like 40s. So I think for me, the best advice that I was given was from a professor, and it was like, never have a plan, just see what comes up, because if you have a really set idea of what you want, while that may be good, you might be turning away opportunities that could be really riveting, really interesting. So just keep an open mind and see what you can do. What I've also found, and that's not necessarily, it didn't work for me, but it's worked for others, is like asking people for informational interviews. Like if there's someone at an organization that you wish you had their job, email them, ask them how they got there, ask them, you know, if you can help, if you can volunteer any hours. Like if you make that connection, that person, often I think it flatters people, so they'll want to help you. But it also just helps you make that connection, figure out what it is that you might need. They might be able to recommend, you know, free online courses or whatever it may be that can get you to that place, right? So just figuring out who you would like to be in the world, in the career world, and then asking them how they got there can really help you craft your path there. And I know that, you know, mentors are an interesting thing. I think that they're a really great relationship. It doesn't always work out, but if you sort of have these like micro mentors, I feel like if you just reach out to all these people are always willing to help, right? So I think that just be bold, add them on LinkedIn, ask them questions, ask them if you can take them for coffee when that's allowed, or ask for a phone call, especially now that everyone's at home. People are just, you know, I think craving some sort of social interaction. So feel free to email people and ask them for you know, 20 minutes of their time on Zoom, and bombard them with questions and ask them for advice.
I also wanted to say that sometimes you'll have to settle for another job. And in my case, settling for another job was a corporate law job, which is not a lot of people's idea of settling. But when I first got out of law school, as Raimy said, it's a degree you get straight out of high school in many countries. I think pretty much every country except for the US and Canada. So I did that for a number of years before I got my master's degree on human rights at Georgetown. And what I found was that when I started applying to jobs, once I had my master's degree, it was actually quite valued that I had research skills that I had developed through working in a law school, in a law firm. Most human rights jobs would require strong research skills, especially those that involve report writing, articles or briefings on human rights issues. And you can develop those skills at any number of jobs. And even as a student, through coursework, projects, or working in journals. Also, project management skills were very useful for jobs I've held in non-governmental organizations and United Nations agencies. And you can build up these skills in any number of jobs again. And also as a student, organizing, managing, coordinating events. and even some soft skills like strong interpersonal and communication skills can be developed in any number of jobs, and you can later get credit for those in your dream job. And so that would be one advice. And the other one is following what Alexandra was saying, that you don't have to have like a set view of what you want to do. I think that's very valuable advice. After coming out of Georgetown, I had the dream of working at the UN. And what I had envisioned was like a staff position in Geneva or New York. And while that hasn't happened, I've been working with United Nations agencies as a consultant for about 10 years. And I think I actually get the best of the two worlds, because I go on trips to New York and Geneva, but I also get to live at home where the weather is nice and my family lives. So again, you can have like a basic image of your dream and work from that. You don't have to deviate too much from it, but you don't have to have it set in stone either.
Great, thank you all. So the next question I want to ask is, as you look back on your careers and the different organizations, what were some challenges that you encountered in the course of your career, and these moments that discouraged you, or even maybe made you think like, geez, is this really what I want to do? This is really hard work. And how did you overcome those periods?
I can go first. I think for me, and I can confirm this because then I found a book that said this with a lot of interviews from other humanitarian workers, because I thought I was about to lose it. It's burnout for sure, but it's not the burnout you think it's gonna be. You're not burning out because you're seeing all this tragedy and all this crisis. That's not it. You're inspired by that. You're inspired by people's resilience to survive that and to overcome that. It's the bureaucracy and the paperwork and the report writing that goes to no one's desk so someone can say, oh, maybe I'll think about it. So that was really soul crushing, and it still is. So I think there's that burnout comes from this mismatch between what you think you were going to do. You're like, I'm gonna help people, and then what you actually end up doing a lot of the time, which is again writing a lot of reports. So I think that is a big challenge, is that burnout from that disconnect. And it doesn't come from seeing the tragedy or hearing the hard stories or witnessing the hardships. It comes from the bureaucracy of humanitarian agencies.
I would add for that, that's something that I listed in my things I wanted to talk about. And to me, it's the burnout from, it comes in different forms. I've seen loads of people come in and be like, I'm going to change the world. And you just see them like crash and burn very quickly when they realize like, the aid system's not, a flawless process. There's a lot of problematic parts about it. It's also, for me, it's the sort of, I remember briefing someone on the Hill about Congo and saying like that 13.5 million people at the time needed humanitarian assistance. And the person was like, give me a sexy figure. And I was like, that's a third of the population of Canada. Like, I don't have anything more riveting than that. Like, and they were like, well, why should we care now? And it's like, you should care all the time, right? Like, it's a really, really disheartening process to live and breathe something that then people don't find interesting or don't find, it doesn't impact them. So it can be really, really difficult. And I think it's really, really tricky to navigate that without being offended or taking it personally. But there's also, we have to, for me, what I do is I like focus on the fact that it's a luxury for me to do this. It's a luxury for me to go and like be in a place that's, whatever, war torn, whatever it may be, and then have the luxury of being like, I want to leave and go home, right? So their suffering is not my suffering. I can't make it about me, otherwise it's taking it away from them. And it's, that I think it's wrong to make it about myself. And that's the thing, you don't burn out because of those things you saw. you burn out because of all of the other stuff, right? So it's separating yourself from other people's lives, not making it about you, but trying to be some sort of channel for whatever that is. It's a tricky balance. It's a tricky balance within a world that doesn't necessarily, you know, attribute as much importance to whatever issue that you are giving it.
You know, my father worked 35 years with the same company his whole career. You, according to the stats, will probably change your job every 3 to 4 years the rest of your life. And that the one benefit that helps maybe address a little bit of the potential burnout is as you move between kind of working on frontline issues and working on policy side. And you know, the worst thing in the world is people who go straight through from undergrad to grad or law school and then immediately into a policy position, and they haven't had that opportunity to be living with communities or working with communities to understand the dynamics of what are going on there. And then they're trying to design policies without that real kind of understanding. So make sure that you're finding a way to like balance your insights, whether you do that through kind of your external volunteering in addition to your job, or if you make that part of your job, kind of you will move around in your career, and make sure you kind of go back and forth if possible between frontline service provision and policy making. It'll make you a better policy maker, if nothing else. The second thing is you know, the biggest struggle for me, I'm at, you know, a 10,000 person agency with $22 billion budget, and yet I feel like I'm Sisyphus pushing a rock up the mountain all the time on why we need to better engage youth and emerging leaders in any of our programming. And what I quickly learned is never start a conversation with saying that I'm the youth advisor at USAID, because they have an immediate image of what that is. Like saying you're the gender advisor. You always start with what is their issue and what's their challenge. Are you working on, you know, violent extremism? Are you working on climate change? And then talk about how these strategies that we've found to be effective that engage youth and emerging leaders actually help them get better returns on investment. That's what I found is the way to get like through the door into the more important like designs. And then the third thing I would just say is, you know, finding that balance between bureaucracy and scale. I think as someone just said, you know, if you're in any of these agencies, there's a certain amount of bureaucracy that you have to be prepared for. But the one benefit of being in, you know, an organization that does have that, whether you're UNDP or Refugee International or USAID, is that you have the ability to do things at a little bit larger scale. So you have to be able to balance, you know, some of the bureaucracy that it takes to be able to be also working at a certain level, and really finding that strategic alignment between. The last thing that I'll say is, you know, in any large agency, you've got silos of, you know, the different units or offices, and really looking for how do you build the connective tissue, I would call it, between the different offices so that they're actually open to wanting to figure out how do we collaborate, because most people have their blinders of what their office does, and it's, you know, they don't have the bandwidth to figure out how does that connect to other offices or other partners. So being really good at figuring out how you identify that connective tissue and making it easy for people to partner.
I don't have a lot to add to what Raimy, Alexandra, and Michael said. I just wanted to briefly mention that something that that I've found it's useful to help me get through burnout or the fact that working in human rights is often a thankless job is reminding myself of the enormous privilege I've had with my education, which is similar to the education you are getting now. I had the generous support of the Department of State. I also had a Fulbright scholarship, like Raimy mentioned. And I had donors who invested in giving the opportunity of a Georgetown education to students from all socioeconomic backgrounds. And to this day, this recognition has played a big role in pushing me to give my absolute best while doing my work. So just that quick reminder for all of you on the duty we carry as privileged persons.
Okay, thank you all. I think, yeah, any organization you go in, the amount of bureaucracy and I'll say like the small p politics that you have to manage is always more than I think anybody ever expects when you're going out into the working world. So one other question is, what are some changes in the organization, the leadership or the values that you've noticed since you've started working in the field? Now, this could be, changes in a positive way or changes perhaps not in a positive way, but like what's kind of the culture like as it stands now, and how has that changed since when you started?
I'm happy to start. For me, I think as a Canadian that's lived in the US, I only ever worked in advocacy under the Trump administration. So I moved here from the Central African Republic out of frustration with the fact that there was limited interest in the Central African Republic. So I moved here in 2017. And at the time, I was the only non-American working for my organization, right? So it was a really, really interesting time to see that people were understandably very frustrated with what was happening to refugee resettlement, which was happening to aid. And it was also a really bizarre time for me because as a non-American, US foreign policy I felt was problematic prior to Trump. And at the same time, US engagement in West and Central Africa, even under Trump, was really good, right? I don't think it was diplomatically good, but the majority of humanitarian funding still came from the US. So it was a really, really bizarre time to interact where I can understand that people who come from this country felt frustrated with the government on the humanitarian side, but it didn't necessarily impact my issues. Or it was also the issue of, we saw funding for Palestinians get cut, but then that was, diverted to Africa. So it was a very, very complicated time. And I think that for me, that's completely changing now, where how we engage is being redetermined. And for me, I've never worked in advocacy. I was in the field before, and I didn't work for an American organization. So right now we're in a complete state of flux, and I'm not sure how to do my job because it completely shifts it. And we have to now, I'm in an interesting opportunity place to where I can actually ask for a little bit more diplomatic engagement and not necessarily worry about what that means. It's a very, very, so I don't have an indication of what that is, but right now is the change that's happening for me, having never worked in advocacy under an administration that necessarily cares about refugee resettlement, but also trying to maintain that engagement on the funding side. So it's all just feeling around in the dark for me right now.
Definitely a new day and a new feeling within our agency in the last few months. I think that you can definitely feel a palpable sense of kind of renewed focus. And I will say, to the credit of our administrator, Mark Green, in the last administration, he did some really good things that I felt were helpful in focusing on what the concept that he was advancing was called self-reliance. And it's like, how do you build the capacity and commitment of governments and civil society and just individuals to say, how do we advance our self-reliance in partnership? So how do we advance domestic resource mobilization to match the very small amount that is in reality foreign assistance? How do we really use our small bit to leverage private sector engagement or development credit authorities or lots of other ways? So I would say that, there has been this move and a focus to what we call more of a focus on, where we're trying to be like using our small bit of foreign assistance to be more transformational, releasing the opportunities within the private sector, within domestic government resource mobilization, within others. So that's definitely been one thing that has changed. And then obviously now, for at least the current window, the USAID and US government foreign policy priorities are pretty clear. It's pandemic humanitarian response, without a doubt, number one right now. It's climate change and climate action. It's pushing back against resurgent authoritarian tendencies. And then it's, investing in human capital improvement. So the local system for education, for employment, and for health. So those are some of the main things that we're really focused on for the next few years.
Well, I think I'm gonna go a little more big picture and philosophical. I think a big change that we're seeing across the humanitarian sector is really reimagining the work completely, because the work was set up more like Western and North aid to poor countries and a top-down decision-making on how this is how we fix your problems. And I think this has been, there has always been concern about this, but this is growing. It's a growing sentiment within humanitarian workers in all different organizations and leaders as well. So I think there are definitely a lot of voices being raised about just reimagining the whole. It's not that aid is not needed, but it's how do we do it hand in hand with communities who know what they need, and not the humanitarian organizations telling them this is what you need. So for example, working with refugees in the Caribbean, it's not the same Venezuelans going to Trinidad and Tobago where they don't speak English. We're going to the DR, so you can't set a budget for language education because that's what Venezuelans need when they speak the language. So you can't, obviously that doesn't happen like that, but you really need to work hand in hand with communities to see what they need, how they need it, and how is best to support local organizations that are already doing the work. So I think there is definitely now a lot of value in this, in new views and perspectives on how to decolonize the work of humanitarian organizations and improving the work environment. It's also, it's a job like any other, so there can be a toxic work environment, and just how to always make sure that humanitarian organizations are rising to the occasion in a timely manner, because sometimes we are behind and trying to catch up and then we respond too late. So I think that's more of the like systemic change I'm seeing within humanitarian organizations right now.
Yeah, I wanted to agree with what was said. I also see that trend in trying to center communities, to have communities be at the forefront of all humanitarian work and all human rights work. I've worked frequently with organizations and communities of transgender women across the Americas, and I've seen firsthand how having their voices be heard has brought a number of positive effects. The Global Fund Against HIV, Malaria, and Tuberculosis has changed their policy throughout the years to try to get to a place where communities are actually at the center of their response against HIV. And for the case of trans women, that has meant a lot, because that means that their issues are no longer seen only through an HIV lens, but through a human rights perspective that sees their struggles and the vulnerabilities that they face from what they experience and from the violence and impunity that they face. And I also wanted to raise the issue of how technology has changed the human rights field. This is gonna reveal my age, but there wasn't an emphasis on technology back in the day where I started. It's evolving so quickly. and there are some great examples, sure, as to how the use of smartphones has revolutionized our lives, and particularly provided a means for people and communities affected by crisis to have their voices heard. I worked in Tunisia right after the revolution, and that was a very palpable example of this. We've also seen that the use of drones could potentially revolutionize how we deliver aid, reaching more remote areas and making the supply chain shorter. But at the same time, this increasing in diffusion of information and communication technology will also mean that individuals and governments are more able and adept at manipulating information on the internet, even as rights to privacy and free expression come under new increased pressures. So I would say that's a trend worth keeping up with.
Great. Well, thank you all for answering those questions. I think we do have enough people that I think we are going to break. Luca, maybe we can break into 3 different breakout rooms, and that will allow the students maybe a chance to ask some questions on a smaller basis. So we'll do that for about the next 15 minutes or so, and then we'll call everyone back.